Hello, hello. This is Zaide with DramaQuest. Today I am bringing you the server history for the Fippy TLP server. It's sure to be quite a bit of drama. This was, I would argue, a lot more dramatic than the Combine and Sleeper server. People came in with expectations, they came in with plans, and most people had to see their plans fall by the wayside, largely crushed under the boot of a guild called Twisted Legion. So, to help us tell that story, we have brought in an officer from TL called Jain. He's now going by Path to Eternity and a few other names. Jain, the floor is yours.
Hey Zaid, thanks for having me on here. Very cool to have an opportunity to sit down and reminisce over the beginning of the Fippy Darkpaw server, and then for me, kind of the arc to uh, the high life that most of us in TL tried to live on that server, and then think about the eventual demise of the guild and eventually the server too.
You guys really were a kind of Wild West. We are going to come into the store, smash the windows, take everything we want, and leave you on the ground kind of guild, like more than any other guild I've seen.
Yes, agreed. That's very true. Uh, Fippy Darkfall was my first TLP server, although I've continued to play on TLP servers since then. Not every single one. I don't re-roll every time they spin up a new one, um, but have played on several since, including Ragefire, where a lot of the TL gang got back together and kind of tried to reproduce what we did on Fippy with moderate success. But I think that I think that part of what made that work on Fippy wasn't just Twisted Legion and who we were as a group of players, but you had a lot of other players and other guilds interested in playing along in that drama, which in the long run wasn't really effective. And so I think on future TLPs, very few people wanted to come show up at the playground to play anymore. There was a little bit
Yes.
of that. There was always the TL citizen back and forth, but most of the other players didn't.
Now
They just weren't interested in that anymore.
you guys always struck me as kind of being um, a big step ahead of everyone else, not just in like performance in game, but I played on the Vulak server back then, and I had started my first ever Quest guild at that same time. So you and I remember we talked a lot
We did.
cross server back
We
then.
did.
TL was just so far ahead of its competition, and when Faceless was competing with EOE, we lost more than we won, but the gap wasn't as wide as what existed on Fippy, and the competition wasn't as fierce as what existed on Fippy, and it just seemed like you guys were just always several steps ahead of everyone, from organization to knowing spawn timers, knowing what to expect. And I think a lot of that is because of the guilds, a collection of guilds that kind of coalesced into
Hmm.
what was TL at the launch of that server. Can you talk about that a little bit? The other guilds that became TL.
Yeah, sure. So I was not one of the founding members of Twisted Legion. I joined pretty early on in the server, just maybe a month or two into Classic. Um, Zain was the founding guild leader, and my understanding is that he had a combine background with ROI and brought along with him a lot of seasoned, well, not of course not TLP veterans because they were just progression servers without the time lock component, but brought some seasoned players along with him. But early on, I mean, they were always open to skilled players, but there were a lot of just new faces with a variety of backgrounds. But so, I don't know if this was just kind of a lining up of the planets or it's my nostalgia or whatever. Um, but there was such a pool of game knowledge at what felt to me at just the highest levels, all concentrated into not just the TL leadership, but really within the guild itself. It was an incredible collection of just exceptional players that knew the game inside and out. They knew how EverQuest worked under the hood, um, and to be able to take advantage of that for anything competitive. Um, Not that other guilds that we were competing against didn't have some of that, but I just don't think that they had it in spades the way that TL did. And I'm not trying to be conceited or arrogant or anything like that. That was just the nature of the guild.
Oh yeah, and it was a lot driven by, I think, people coming from really competitive servers previously. Like you mentioned, Zain was probably on Combine, ROI. I think you guys also had Zygon, literally the leader
Hmm.
of ROI from
Yeah.
Combine.
Hmm.
I know you had a bunch of IV guys in there because
Hmm.
the original Twisted Legion website was literally Insidious EQ. It was the
Yes,
Insidious
that's right.
Vision website.
Yes.
And who else did you have? You had Thraka for sure,
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
was Fires of Heaven on Combine, and I
Yep.
think you had Aloria
Yep.
from who was the guild leader of Fires of Heaven. And
Yes.
then last and still important, you had a bunch of guys from P99 Blue and Glorious
Hmm.
Bastards. And the IB thing is significant here because it was like a bunch of people who came over like February 10th, they're on P99 Blue. February 11th, they're on Fippy. It's
Yep.
an organized team of friends. And you guys had, there was two brothers from that team, Arduin and Ashkari, who played
Hmm.
in IB, were significant personalities over there. And if you remember, Fippy it didn't have a queue because queues didn't exist functionally
Mm-mm.
back then, but it was just
Mm-mm.
like the server is full, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For like days.
Yeah.
So those guys rolled on Vulak, which I want to say Vulak came out like a few days later
Right.
than
It was
Fippy.
right. Same week, but not same day, I don't think.
Yeah, so those guys rolled on
And Sony
Vulak.
scrambled to throw it together.
Yeah, it was
I
a
do
mess.
remember. Yeah, it wasn't planned as far as we know.
Yeah, so Arduin and Ashkari and a few of the other guys from P99 Blue rolled on Vulak,
Hmm.
and I don't want to get too much into that because that's the next episode. But they ended up making the top guild on Vulak. So I
Hmm.
mean, this was a group of people who were just a step ahead in terms of competitive sense. But they also, you guys had completely disregarded what was considered like decorum and etiquette for racing, right?
Yeah.
Now, when I talked to Yerm about the Combine server, there was one instance where FOH leapfrogged ROI
Hmm.
because ROI engaged RNR, and that usually means like, hey, if you got RNR, you killed it. North Temple was yours,
Hmm.
and it was a really big deal that FOH leapfrogged them and went for Dagarn while they were doing RNR. But on the Fippy server, it's like if you triggered a Vulak, someone might kill your triggered Vulak. It
Yes.
did not matter at
Yep.
all.
Yep. That's very true. It very much was the Wild West. Um, and I think that there was just in so many ways it really was often an arms race. Typically, I don't feel like usually maybe it felt this way if you were in another guild, but I always felt like TL didn't usually come in saying we are going to um, do whatever it takes right out of the gate to win this, to take this, to execute this strategy necessarily. Um, but anytime another guild kind of stepped up to where TL was always willing to take the next step. So if another guild was going to start keeping trackers in the zone, then we were right there with more trackers,
Right.
just for redundancy or something like that. If when a mob spawns, if another guild is can be there ready to kill the mob in 5 minutes, then we're going to make sure that we can be ready in 3 minutes. It didn't matter. We were just willing to do a couple percent more than whoever was challenging us, and that was real consistent through all the expansions that I played through.
I think that's a really good point. Um, I always felt like TL, like even looking back at their kill times and the server first times, the server first times for Twisted Legion are not super competitive. They're not really good, and I
Hmm.
think TL was really a guild that, like you just said, they were going to be a few seconds faster than the competition. They weren't trying to
Mhm.
be the absolute best that they could
Mm-mm.
be. They were trying to make sure they won, and sometimes the margins were going to be thin because they were kind of swaggering and cocky. Now, that a good thing that this brings up is the server first Nagafen, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't like on the other servers where when you were ready, you just went and you killed Nagafen. Can
Mhm.
you talk to us about TL's server first Nagafen kill?
Well, I wasn't there for it, so I can't take credit there. But I understand that we just leapfrogged over, I think, Armageddon, to bag that kill, which was something that TL was almost always willing to do. I mean, not just to get a server first, but um, what you were saying about that kind of setting aside former decorum with guild type stuff. TL was always willing to jump over someone else or DPS race or just kind of whatever it takes to do, like I was saying, to take one more step than the next guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, so.
Now, I remember on that specific scenario,
Hmm.
um, Armageddon was going for the server first Nagafen, and they had a force that probably was capable of doing it. Now, Arma
Hmm.
was led by Lone.
Yep.
I know one of their officers was Darkest, right? You guys remember that he was kind of he became like a joke of a Shadow Knight.
Uh-huh.
And then I think there was one other significant person in Arma at this time named Drillison.
Now Drill and I go way back. Hmm.
Was Drill in Arma at launch?
If he was, maybe he was, but by the time I joined TL, Drill was already in TL. I'm 99% sure of that.
He
Um,
must have. I think he maybe joined early. For some reason, I have it in my mind that Drillison started the server in Armageddon and then joined TL later.
that could be. That's a great question. I could, and Drill and I still stay in touch. Um, I ought to ask him about that. Um, the other name that's coming to mind, and I thought he was with Armageddon, but there were other guilds, and I might be having them mixed up. But War Power.
Yes, War
Um,
Power, and War Power would go on later to lead Ion United, right?
that's right. Hmm.
Yep. So a lot of big names there, and
Hmm.
Aleda just hit me up, by the way, and confirmed that Drill was in Arma that first week or
Okay.
two.
Okay. Yeah. And and anybody who knows Drill, um, yeah, I'm sure that losing just a single server first, that's not the guild he's interested in being in. So that
Yeah,
doesn't
I could tell you
surprise me
he
at
he
all.
was in TL and became an officer in TL
Yes.
fast enough to have done the classic server first update on the website.
Yeah.
So it was quick. But yeah, so they were going for it. And I guess TL saw like, okay, somebody's actually going for Nagafin. So they went, formed up, mobilized,
Hmm.
trained the fire giants
Hmm.
from the 5 spawn room
Yep.
onto Arma. Arma's fumbling with it. While they're fumbling the ball over there, TL goes and gets that Nagafin kill.
Yep.
Now,
Uh,
at the time, TL was led by Zain, right?
yeah. Zane would have still been the leader at that point. Hmm.
Yeah. He wasn't the leader for very long, but
No. By the time Kunok rolled around, I know that the leader tags had passed on. But really, that was a real theme, especially in contrast to Citizen, who's just eternally led by Dima. And I'm sure that there are officers that were consistent in Citizen too, but um, mostly I just know Dima, and he's just always the Citizen figurehead. Whereas in TL, and I don't say this negatively, I do think it was the nature of almost the chaotic nature of the guild, but leader tags passed around pretty frequently. Of course, that's a high stress, high stakes position. Um, so sometimes it was just people coming and going. I'd say that the guild was almost led more as a leadership team, and so like just about any officer in the guild was capable of leading raids, leading the guild, whatever needed to be done. If you were the first officer on, at a 3 a.m. bat phone, I mean, you were the raid leader for the
right.
next 30 minutes. Um,
I remember
and
you
then,
telling me that a long time ago. It's like basically like in this guild, every officer is a raid leader.
yeah, Yeah, that's basically what it was. I was pretty new to ratings. That's not something that I was doing a lot. And sometimes you were just kind of the acting raid leader until someone more experienced logged on. But you needed to be able to do it. Like you needed to know how to run the raid window. You needed to know how to call for ports. You needed to know how to assign tanks. You just e- e- everybody needed to be able to step in case somebody slept through the bat phone or whatever.
But luckily back then, with no mitigation on the mighty and stuff, it was not a heavy task for those first couple expansions.
No, it was it was very different back then. Even to this day, I understand the point of mitigation of the mighty, and I'm not saying it's totally implemented incorrectly, but in largely, I'm not a fan of how it is implemented currently. I think it took a lot of fun out of rating. But there were many nights where I'd get a bat phone at 2:30 a.m. Uh, log in, bleary eyed. We'd all meet at the guild bind point, port to wherever we were going, bag the dragon, and 45 minutes later or less, I was back in bed, falling back asleep.
Right. Yeah, now those fights are pretty long, especially
Yeah,
when you get into that Velius era, Lucklin
yeah,
era. They
yeah, yeah.
take
It's just
forever.
insane.
So all that happened. I remember that first Nagafen was done, and it
Hmm.
created an incredible flurry on the forums because no one had ever done like something so aggressive,
Hmm. Hmm.
or it had been a long time really since
Hmm.
EQ had seen that because the live servers had long since been in instance content, etc.
Yeah.
So I remember it was a huge deal. And Zain came on the forums, and all he did was he posted. He was like, just suck it up, deal with it.
Hmm.
And everyone was mad. He's like, here I am, hard dick in the wind, come get me, motherfuckers, and that was
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And I loved that. Just kind of the way that Zane looked at things. He was real fun. He was real charismatic, and I really liked him. He did come back at least once or twice. But we didn't really see much of him for the rest of TL's lifetime. And in some ways, I think that almost gave him like this mythical, uh, atmosphere about him. He would just show up randomly, and he could just kind of step in where he left off. Probably would have been nice to have him around a little bit more, but um, is a tough server. But I think I think that kind of set the tone for the server and for the guild. This is probably something that good for me to hone in on is that we very much played with the mindset or motto that if if the programming of the game allows us to do something, then we're allowed to do it.
I mean, so
And
I think you guys got a reputation for doing things that the programming didn't want to allow you to do too.
that's fair too, and we can definitely talk about that also.
Oh, we
Um,
will, we will.
yeah, good. But just that we weren't really a huge fan of GMs or Sony at the time or whoever coming
Right,
in and saying, "Yeah, we know that the game allows you to do this, but we don't really want you to do it."
right. And
And
like social pressure wasn't going to stop you guys.
no, no. When it comes to uh, any kind of bugs or exploiting or whatever, that definitely is a kind of a separate topic. But yeah, if the game lets you train fire giants on people and jump over them to kill a dragon, if you don't like that, fix your game. That's not our problem. And yeah, so there was a lot of that. There was always that.
I think so. Early on, it quickly became apparent. Like Armageddon talked a lot early on in the server,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
Darkest was kind of like a voice for those dudes, and he talked a lot of trash before early on. But it
Hmm.
became quickly clear that they just were not going to cut it. Right? They had a big
Yeah.
fiasco with Plane of Fear, where
Hmm.
Darkest was their raid leader, wasn't level 46 yet somehow, and couldn't zone in to lead the raid. So he led it from the Fear portal outside, and it
Hmm.
was an abysmal raid. They
Yeah.
went for an open world. Well, I guess everything was open world at this time. They went for
Hmm.
Finney, and they wiped to Finney, and then Flurry and the boys from TL picked it up and killed it right in front of them.
Hmm.
And they were just not doing good. And then
Hmm.
Dima's crew at that point got large. Now they got large because of the guild that you used to be in. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I don't even remember the name of this family guild that me and a couple real life friends uh, rolled on. We were there on launch day. We were excited about the opportunity to play in the server, but we didn't necessarily set out to be raiders in the top guild. We had just, well, I'll speak for myself. I had just played EQ casually since release. I was there on Tuesday, March 16th, 1999. I was playing. I was at my uncle's house, and he had brought home a couple copies of EQ, and I was playing with him and my cousin. But I had just played casually on and off. Um, I thought brand new server. That sounds like fun. I remembered when Combine and Sleeper came out. I was in college and couldn't really commit to playing on a server like that, but followed it kind of loosely. And so I was excited to play on a TLP server. I thought the time locked part was neat. The voting idea was novel. Glad that they got rid of that. Um, but it was just kind of a family type guild. Um, and we were just going to play casually with the mindset of, hey, hopefully we'll get to kill some dragons at some point. Not a huge game plan on that, which was good because that would not have worked on the server. Um, but me and my friend got max level fairly quickly. And we were, especially in that guild. Now, other people on Fippy, um, the TL crew, Citizen, Armageddon, the other raiding guilds, they had hit 50 much sooner. But we put our grind in, hit 50, or let's say 46, and wanting to start to dabble in the planes and get some of the planar armor. And we were we were much we were kind of the upper crust, I guess, of that guild. A lot of people, we're in our upper 40s or 50s, starting to camp armor in the plains, and we've still got people, fooling around in their teens, in their level 20, whatever, which is totally fine. I don't, I'm not making fun of those people, and I think it's cool to play EQ casually. I play a lot more casually today, although I do still raid. Um, but uh, the guild leader was, I think, level 30 something, and an officer in the guild. I don't think I was an officer in that guild. There was an officer in the guild that was starting to lead, like, especially Plane of Hate, we'll call them expeditions. Not the EQ term expedition, but just like these excursions into the plane to try to help people get armor. And I didn't know this at the time, uh, but he had, I guess, had his eyes on joining Citizen. Not sure why Citizen over TL, but he had brokered a deal with Citizen, with Dima, I assume, to bring all of these planar players over from our family guild uh, into Citizen in exchange to become an officer in Citizen. That didn't sit very well with me, but I did understand where they were coming from. That clearly the guild I was in was not up to speed with the play style that I was probably going to play on this server. So he wound up taking his crew to Citizen, whereas me and a real life friend of mine, we split. We did split off because it was the right decision, but we went with TL instead.
Now that
And
guy who left and went to Citizen, Forensic, right?
yeah, yeah, that's forensic.
Yeah, no, he becomes pretty significant on this server because he starts the Harm Touch Wars.
Yes. And the harm touch wars, that I was thinking about that earlier when we were kind of talking about the arms race, and just matching and then exceeding whatever is thrown at us. And I don't remember much of that in classic. But by Kunark, it was a real thing, and you can look up the SK armies and this kind of stuff. But TL wasn't bringing armies of Shadow Knight boxes to um, to Poop Socks because there wasn't really a need to. The dragon, the god, whoever would spawn, and we just fight it and kill it and DPS race whoever else was there. But once another guild started to bring SKs to blow their harm touch and get all that quick damage, we had to start doing it too. And
So
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
before we get too far down that path,
Yeah,
I just
sure.
want to touch the like basically when Forensic brought those guys over to
Yep.
Citizen,
Hmm.
it really elevated the competitive level of Citizen in the raid scene, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I think that
so
it did.
by the time you were joining TL was about the same time that Citizen was going to become like a major player. And Arma was falling off, but you still had this little three-way battle going
Hmm.
on, right?
Hmm.
And GMs woke up every day with a new idea of how they were going to enforce
Hmm.
rules and raids on the server, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Like I remember on our side, we had to roll, we had to do trivia, all kind of like sometimes it was first and force. I
Yep.
think the thing that they ended up primarily going with in that classic content though was first and force, right? That's what they landed on for a couple months.
Hmm. Hmm. That was usually the card the GM would play. It wasn't
Now
guaranteed, but usually.
that would turn into some at first some light poop socking, right?
Hmm.
Like first and force just pretty much says like, hey, if you're there beforehand, you got it. So that starts
Yes.
some poop socking. And
When
now,
the window would open.
right now,
Hmm.
Dima used to be a guide back in the old days, right? For people who
I'm
might
not
not,
sure if I did know that, but it doesn't surprise me, and maybe I did know it.
yeah. So for people who don't know what a guide is, it's basically like a assistant to a GM. It's a volunteer based thing, but
Hmm.
you're definitely not a normal player. I don't think he was anymore, but there's some connections you make when you do those things that probably never go away.
Yeah.
Now, there came a point where the three guilds were in contention for an as yet unspawned Lady Vox,
Hmm.
and EverQuest started to become Petition Quest.
Hmm.
On this day, a GM woke up feeling crazy, and he
Hmm.
said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to spawn Lady Vox for each of the three guilds here."
Hmm. Hmm.
So he decided he was going to do it in a certain order. I think TL went first. They
Hmm.
got their Lady Vox. Everyone else had to zone out.
Yeah.
Then TL zones out. Citizen gets theirs. Boom, they got it. Then Arma zones in
Hmm.
and fights their Lady Vox, and they start to wipe.
Hmm.
And then TL zones in and
Hmm.
kills their Lady Vox.
Yeah. I think at that point, I don't want to say that we were honoring first and force or first to engage or anything like that because uh, frankly a lot of those to say that you were honoring this thing or that thing was sometimes just theater really, but it was very easy for us to say, hey, we honored what the GM said, but this guild is clearly wiping or has wiped, and that makes it FFA. So now we are going to engage and take this dragon.
And
Um,
shockingly, the GM was just like, okay,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. It was the inconsistency. What it really boiled down to with the GMs. So competing against the other guilds, we all had the same interests, right? Like we were all going for the same thing. We were all heavily, highly emotionally invested in what we were doing. But we were also competing against the GMs, right? And the GMs, they didn't care. They didn't care about this server. They didn't care about these guilds. They didn't care about these players. And so you could tell that they're just sitting there rolling their eyes, coming up with these goofy ways to educate things. And we're
Yes.
having to tolerate it, but trying to take that as seriously as competing against these other guilds is just a completely different playing ground there.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they would like summon you
Yes.
in the competing leader to
Yep.
Kanos Catacombs
Yep. Yep.
and make you do like Lord of the Rings trivia, or just be like, "Hey, here you go, you guys talk it out." Like, what?
Yep. I have a screenshot of myself sitting in that cat room with all the cat heads, and I'm in there with Dima, and a GM is making us roll, I don't know, best 2 out of 3 or something. And and that was just so. I didn't usually get caught up too much in the GM stuff. I'm not sure how I got on that one. Um, I might be wrong, but what I'm thinking is that all of the other leadership had been suspended, and so I was the only officer online at the time. That kind of thing happened too.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of the guy that got summoned to roll off against this dragon or whatever it was, and it was really nerve wracking. Sitting there thinking, man, there's nothing about skill or strategy or execution here that is going to win my guild this dragon. I'm literally at the mercy of the random number generator, and we did win. I won the two rolls or the highest or whatever it was. I do remember that, but I thought, man, like if I lose this, all these people in my guild are going to be so pissed at me, and I had
Right.
nothing to do with it.
Right.
It's just insane.
So, yeah, you had to deal with all that, and then eventually it became like maybe it was the first person to touch the dragon, and if
Hmm.
you lost the DPS race but you hit it first, you could petition and get the loot. Blah blah
Yep.
blah.
Hmm.
It ended up becoming what we call the Harm Touch Wars.
Hmm.
For some reason, Harm Touch did what, like 3,000 damage?
Yeah, it was. They've made changes to it, and there's mitigation of the mighty now, but it would hit for a couple thousand, even in classic and Kunark. Um, I don't know that it was unresistible, but I think it had some insane resist modifiers, so you didn't
Nothing
really
was
have to worry
resisting
about
it.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And it meant like it literally, for people who didn't experience it, it literally meant
mhm.
if your guild had 5 or 6 Shadow Knights land Harm Touch, you could not lose the DPS race.
Right, right. And I don't know how much detail you want to get into that now, or
This
you
is it.
know,
This is the time. Let's
okay,
100% it.
or abuse of the game. Um, I never used it on Fippy, but there was rampant MQ usage.
Yeah.
Um, and it was always kind of interesting because the nature of the server, it's weird for me to think about like live servers and things where I know that people don't just use MQ openly. Uh, like I don't want to put it that way, but it's just so much more casually accepted. Where on Fippy, it was this weird dynamic where if you even just breathe the idea of MQ um, in the wrong circles or publicly or anything like that, it was you were just done almost. Um, but behind closed doors,
Everyone was using it.
yeah, everybody was using it. At least all of the guild leadership, I would say, across um, all or most of the guilds that were trying to compete. And so you take that, um, couple it with this arms race, and of course the ridiculousness we were dealing with the GMs and Sony, and you mix all that up and put it in the oven, and what comes out is people sitting there with SK bot armies that are all running on MQ, and you've got um, the raid window filled with 20 or 30 Shadow Knights in, and there may be 2 or 3 raids depending on how many guilds are poop socking contesting this dragon, this god, whoever. And these guys are running these scripts that are waiting for the mob to spawn and immediately hit harm touch, target it and hit harm touch, and you've got a situation which almost feels ridiculous to talk about, because if you weren't there or if you didn't know how EQ worked, you would think that's not even, that couldn't even be possible. But you literally had these raid targets um, getting harm touched and dying
You
before they
couldn't
even
even,
rendered in the game.
yes, couldn't even see the mob. Like it
No,
would come up
no.
as a gray blob with no
Yep.
textures, and it would
Right.
be a corpse.
And you just have a corpse. And you would just have to hope that your guild's Shadow Knights press their harm touch button faster than the other guilds.
Yeah.
It was a real coin flip.
Now, Frenzik was the person, and he was at this time an officer and citizen. He was the person who saw the TL had more Shadow Knights, and I think what he said one time was he saw all the TL Shadow Knights logging off and then logging back on. So he thought that they had someone, like one person was going to box all the Shadow Knights or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, okay, he wrote a script to make it so that they would automatically harm touch, and
Mm-hmm.
they won that sock.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, sometimes these socks would be like 12 plus hours. So it's
Oh
not
yeah,
crazy to
yeah,
think that
yeah,
like in the middle of a poop sock, he wrote something and then it
yeah,
deployed it.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and they won that sock. And that is that part where the arms race went up another tier, because like
Mm-hmm.
a human being will not beat the MacroQuest bot.
Mm-hmm.
Even an auto fire hotkey won't beat the MacroQuest bot.
Mm-hmm.
So it became like, hey, if you want to win, you got to do this. Now, once
Mm-hmm.
everyone who's competing is using MQ2 to automate harm touches beyond human speed potential, it becomes the worst thing ever, which is who lives closer to
Yep.
the Sony servers.
Yeah. 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 It's true.
And when you find that person who, between all the guilds, lives the closest, if they're the one running it, you just can't beat them. You can't
Yeah.
do anything
It's
about it.
just a ping war, a latency race at that point.
And the GMs refused to acknowledge that it was a problem.
They did, and that was so tough because it wasn't just I at least I don't think it was just TL like roughhousing this server and trying to bend it to its will. I mean, you had these other guilds like Citizen, like Armageddon, and there were others also that I believe in good faith genuinely did want to compete. They actually wanted to play EverQuest at a competitive level. Um, and I know that a little bit of that had happened in EQ's history, and I don't want to discount any of that. But this to me felt like the server where people showed up to play competitively, and it was just like the GM said, "Nah, we're just not going to let you play this game that way."
Right.
There's,
Like if they're
there's,
not going to enforce the rules, then everyone's going to end up cheating.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the way it
So
went.
that pretty much that evolution into the harm touch wars,
Hmm.
unfortunately, right at the end of Classic, right?
Hmm.
So we're about to go into Kunark. What was your Kunark game plan?
So I have been sitting here trying to think of some of these server launches, which, as you remember, they're different than they are today. Today, they recently changed those sorry, not server launches, but expansion unlocks um, from Wednesdays to Thursdays, and they happen at about 5 p.m. Eastern time. Earlier in the afternoon across the rest of the U.S.
Yes. It used
And
to be whatever random ass day
it,
and midnight.
no, it was midnight Pacific time
Yeah.
on Sunday night, and
Oh,
so
was it
if
Sunday night?
it,
Yeah.
it, it was
And
Sunday night, so if you were
no
an
GM
East
was going to be
Coaster,
on.
no GM was going to be on.
It was
If
going to
you
be the Thunderdome for 5 hours, baby.
Yeah, yeah, and you had taken off Monday from work, and you were up with your guild if you were on the East Coast at 3 a.m. ready to go. Um, I remember sitting around uh in what North Row or wherever it is that we needed to go from. Um, I think I'm thinking of the Velios unlock now. But part of let me step back a little bit and you'll relate to this. Part of something that people don't think about, those older raids let you have 72 people in the raid, but we were raiding around the clock, and we needed to field um, a raid at any time of day, any time of night. And so we had a lot of players in the guild, more than normal live guilds have today. Well, I'm not just going to say assume. I mean, that's just the truth. And so I think it was the Velios unlock. We had a Ventrilo server, and we had to upgrade it because we had hit the 99 or 100 user capacity. We had that many people logged on for the expansion unlock.
And everyone
Um,
comes back. All those people who quit after the first
yes,
Nagavin died, they come
right.
back for Kunark launch.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They've got their server first. They've got enough best in slot gear that they just take a month off. So you'd have these weird resurgences, and we'd have just the guild bursting at the seams for these unlocks, even though they were in, the weirdest times you can imagine. Um, but anyway, speaking of uh, the Kunark unlock. I think that's what the question was, right?
Yeah.
Um, I was there for that, and I don't necessarily remember all the details of what we were trying to do or what we accomplished that night. I wish that I did. I guess it's been about 12 years now. Um, Tell me what you've got from your notes, and let me go off of
All
that.
right. Yes. So if you remember, I
Yeah,
logged into, because your Kunark date wasn't the same date that my Kunark opened. So I
that's
logged
right.
into a
That's right.
level 1 dwarf
Yes.
and came and hung out with you guys at the
Yeah,
docks on Butcher Block.
that's right.
And I was inspecting your members, and I was like, "Hey, dude, honestly, like your guys have less gear than our guys."
Yeah.
And it is a combination of probably a lot of people coming back who hadn't played, but also you guys had more competition. Gear was more divided, right? Like
Yeah, but
Faceless
yeah,
had unlimited plane to sky time. We just sat there all day, every day,
we had
basically.
a lot of mouths to feed, but
Yeah,
even though I wasn't in those first few Sky runs, man, I know that we were porting up to Sky. A lot of people were half in patchwork because
yeah,
they had just they had just been grinding nonstop, and getting gear wasn't a focus.
yeah.
But continue on. I'm diverging here.
So now you guys were at the docks, and it was all
Hmm.
cool. Now the people who knew that there was actually a second strat, and the sitting at the docks was a feint. I don't know if the other guilds on your server knew, but
Yes. Oh, I
everyone's
forgot about
secret.
that.
Everyone in TL secretly had field of bone potions.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I don't know if you and I talked about this or whatever. Um, and I don't want to take credit that's not mine because I'm sure I wasn't the only person who discovered this. But I was playing a shaman. I still play a shaman to this day, and had been fooling around with the alchemy pots, and realized that even in classic, I could make the field of bone pots.
Yep.
Of course, that you'd burn 130 plat, which was not a small amount back then.
Yeah.
But I noticed if I clicked it in a classic zone, of course, you wouldn't take me over there without Kunark being unlocked, but it port me to the evac point in the zone, and I let the I don't even I didn't even think that was public knowledge in TL. I believe I worked that out with the rest of leadership, got funded to make a bajillion pots, and then that night at the docks we passed them out because we were so concerned about that information leaking.
It was a real close secret.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so you guys go there, boom,
Mm-hmm.
easy crush the first server first sev.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Go in, race for keys for track.
Mm-hmm.
I think I pretty much remember that being a blowout. You guys got all your Hunter Forger keys, got the server first track. While you did that, I think Dima shot for server first VS.
Mm-hmm.
Euro Guild went for Talendor.
Rosengard, I think, was their
Yeah,
name.
Rosengard.
Mm-hmm.
Rosengard got Talendor.
Mm-hmm.
And Ion United or Armageddon. I think Armageddon was like their dying breath. They went for
Yeah.
Gornair. They wiped to
Whew.
Gornair. So then Citizen came out having killed VS, and they
Mm-hmm.
tried Gornair.
Mm-hmm.
They wiped to Gornair. TL shows up, kills Gornair on top of 2 guilds worth of bodies.
Yeah, you're right, and I do remember that. The whole night, honestly, was just such a shit show. Um, Trying to fight over the foragers for the uh, old Seb keys. Of course, people were using MQ rampantly to track stuff down and
Or
find stuff.
just warp directly to them.
Yeah, or just warp directly to them. I think that I was so naive at that point in my EQ career. I didn't even know warping was a thing. Um, so I didn't know what was going on. It was pretty sad, really. But yeah, just warping to the forgers and getting their key pieces. Um, and then I think that there was kind of a I don't remember how much discussion there was, but I think that we kind of all knew like who was gunning for what on that first night, and we were obviously gunning for Trachanon, and we were going to bag Sev on the way.
Get that green
Um,
scale.
yes, get that green scale. Um, but then the Gornair. Well, I mean, you know how this is even before mitigation of the mighty, but Gornair's not easy to do in Era.
No. And kills
Um,
back then were so much smaller than they are on TLPs
yes.
now. And everyone sucked a whole lot more. I'm guessing that Citizen went in, blew their harm touches all on Veneral Sathir, walked out with
Hmm.
no harm touch up, and just got smoked by Gore. And
I think you're
it's
right.
at 51, you're nothing to Gore and Air.
No. Um, I haven't really thought about this in a long time, but I think the general consensus in Kunark is that Gorner is really the toughest fight. Just that
100%.
that um,
You can't dodge the
outdoor
AE.
zone with fear is so difficult.
Yeah.
What's
We
that?
used to drop it was just, it sucks that you can't dodge the AE or anything, you know what I
Mm-mm,
mean? We used to
mm-mm.
drop the summon staff of runes to
Mm-hmm.
try to dispel the slow off of us, but it's so inconsistent. You end up stripping half your buffs. By the time you're
Yeah,
done, slows back on you. It's just like fuck it.
it's it's just such a chaotic fight, and uh, it's just really difficult to do gracefully. I don't even know if it's possible, but yeah, and especially at 51. And I think when we found out, um, we were just not really interested in trying Gornair first, when we had better targets to take anyway. But it was fun to come up and clean up Gore afterwards.
Right. And I mean, the other thing is those dragons, with the exception of Sev, dude, they all drop the same loot pretty much.
Right. Yeah, I
So who
mean, we
cares?
didn't need any of Gornair's loot. It was just, I mean, we
Yeah.
did need it, like we wanted it. I don't mean it that way, but we
Yeah.
didn't need like a white scale.
Right. It was definitely a tier down in concern. Now
Yeah.
the other thing is though, so you get the track kill, but like Vishan's Peak is still out there. People have to key for it. All that has to go on. You guys had a rotation worked out with I want to say like a few other guilds on the server for track, right?
So, and you may be able to correct some of my details here. I think we were constantly, you know, negotiating things and brokering deals and rotations and stuff like that. I might have some of this wrong. This is what I think, and I know that you're gonna jump in here with some extra information at some point, but I think the way that we had it worked out was, basically whoever got into, uh, hmm, I don't want to say this wrong. Um, I think that we had something casually worked out with Citizen um, for Vishan's Peak, which was in our favor. Everything that we, all the deals that we struck were in our favor, of course. Um, but I feel like I'm going to get some of this wrong. Um, I know that we were in there, um, and the idea, what we had pitched was, we'll divvy up these track keys until we have a raid force that's large enough to clear VP and get the unlock timer going. Um, and we always had all of our goals for the guild for loot and kills and stuff like that. But really, like, the prime directive was always get the next expansion open as quickly as possible. And so we use that as leverage to work out some deals. And this is where I think you're gonna, uh, you can share some of these details with what we actually did, because I don't think that we completely held to that the way that we pitched it.
Yeah. What I recall, the word on this all being was like there was some kind of rotation agreement worked out. It was definitely with Citizen. It might have also been with Arma at the time, but there was
Maybe.
going to be a joint strike force for Fardar,
Yeah. Hmm.
and it was something like, hey, I think maybe what it was, whoever got like the first track got the next track, and then from
Hmm.
there it was a rotation.
Hmm.
So it rewarded whoever was on top,
Yeah.
and it was amicable for most people.
Hmm.
So that happened, and obviously TL got it, and then the next one was supposed to be Citizens,
Hmm.
and the everything came with stipulations, right? It was like, hey,
Yes.
it's a rotation, but you can't just leave track up all day, right? You
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
X number of hours to kill track after he spawns, or else you forfeit it and it becomes FFA.
I think it was usually we'd give someone 1 hour. Like
1 hour? Yeah.
we weren't going to leave dragons and gods up. If you couldn't be enforced in an hour, then it was free for all. And if it was free for all, we were going to take it.
That makes sense. So that happened. Now, remember, up till now, every single raid mob has been 3.5 days respawn, which means
Yeah.
like 3 days, and then you have a plus. Actually, I think it was like 3.5 plus minus 12 was
Right.
how it worked back then. Trachanon and Veneral Sathir are 2 days to 2.5 days. No one knew this except for the people who had previously played on Combine FOH.
Yeah.
And the leadership of Combine Sleeper, and the leadership of all those competitive guilds, probably every guild that had ever killed track on those servers was in TL.
Yeah.
So I think Thraka was the guild leader at this time, right? Or was it somebody else?
No, I think
it
that he
Tullian?
was. I could be wrong. Man, that guild leader tag, it just got tossed around so much. I don't want to say for sure.
Okay.
I think it was. I would say Thraka, Tullian, or possibly Drillison at the time. But I think Drillison was later.
So either way, they knew. And sure enough, he pops. It's time for Citizen to get their track kill. The requisite amount of time goes by, and I don't think Citizen even knew he was up. So then
they weren't tracking him yet.
Yeah, so then TL bags it just as they expected, and probably, I would hazard a guess, was part of the plan behind the whole agreement. And then there's drama about it, blah blah blah, but they post like, hey, it's not our fault, you don't know like the respawn timers, maybe you should learn some shit.
Yep.
And then shortly thereafter, I think TL killed Fardar and cleared Vishan's Peak with like a super small force of just 18 or 15 people. Real light force.
Yeah, you didn't need much before the mitigation of the mighty. Well, you know more about that even than we do. I'm sure you'll talk about that with your Vulag stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Fardar was the only one that gave yellow text, I think, in there, and she's the easiest dragon in the whole place, to be honest with you.
That's true too.
So yeah, you guys crushed that, and I think the rest of the server, the rest of the expansion just became more Harm Touch Wars. It literally didn't end. The only reason Harm Touch Wars ended was because when Velius came out, a couple thousand damage didn't do shit to Velius mobs with their increased HP.
No, no, they didn't. That was the big change because the Kunart dragons, at least to my recollection, this was before mitigation of the mighty. They were still 32k hit point dragons, and it wasn't until Velios where you started to see the larger hit point numbers.
Now, actually, so while the Harm Touch Wars are waging on, and First Enforce is being enforced and all that, it got so ridiculous. Like you mentioned that you guys, the Sox first would start when the windows opened, like the window of time when a dragon could spawn. And I think it was like technically like every 6.5 seconds, a dragon could spawn. It does a check. Boom, if it's in the window, it either spawns, or the percent chance it spawns the next time ticks up by a certain amount, and we proceed until the end. Then Dima did something I don't think anyone expected, right? He did the he lost a mob to First Enforce, and then he said, okay, well, we're just going to wait here till next time. And for 3.5 days, he stayed in Plane of Fear, camping Kazakh Thule with his guild.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that. I remember a time doing that for Nagy also, and I'm sure that there were. In fact, I'll mention this too. I think that there were times where we had the raid force split up between 2 points because 2 different raid targets were in window. But yeah, that's or not just in window, but well, yeah, we will say in window. There was a lot of interesting stuff that wound up happening there. But yeah, kind of part of that whole arms race idea. And again, with the egging on of the GMs, which are saying, okay, well, it's going to be whoever's first and fourth here. So yeah, the guilds would start socking when the window opened, but then it moved to, as soon as the mob died, people would just sit down and say, okay, we are in force for the next dragon, the next god, whatever. And we would literally sit our characters there for the next um, 70 hours, or however long it took for this dragon to spawn. And I have a lot of interesting memories um, where we would sit there and our characters would be just parked. We didn't have AA to grind or anything. This is Kunark. Um, and we'd be hanging out in Ventrilo, and we'd be playing other games on the side. We'd be playing League of Legends or Pictionary type games or whatever. It was there was actually a lot of bonding within the guild on those stupidly long poop socks, because we just didn't have anything else to do while we hung out to wait for this dragon to spawn. It's pretty
Yeah.
bizarre if you
I
think
remember
about it.
on Vulak socking so much
Hmm.
that I started just sleeping at my computer. Like that was where I would bring my computer and my bed together, and I would have my computer. I was on a laptop; it'd be open and looking at me, and I would sleep. And people would wake me up with like audio triggers or yelling in vent, so I would hear it. I mean, it's crazy to look back and think what we were doing with our lives for 32,000 HP dragons.
Right. I definitely agree. I remember I was working part time then. I was hadn't been out of college very long, and I'd moved across the country, so I was on Pacific time actually. Um, but I remember I had a studio apartment, and I would sleep right next to my computer. And as soon as that bat phone would go off, and we had in-game audio triggers and stuff too, man, I would jump up and just sit down at my computer, and I'm ready to go.
And it's like sometimes you do all that shit and you still lose. And
Yeah.
you're like, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah, in the moment, it was very cool, and in retrospect, it was a lot of fun. But you also think that was pretty insane.
I always like to think that like the day I first logged into Vulak, if someone told me like my goal was to start a competitive rating guild. If someone told me that day what that would require, I would have logged back off and never played again.
Oh yeah, man, and I didn't even roll on Fippy planning to play competitively or raid much at all. So I think I just if you would have told me, I don't even think I would have believed you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like who would do that?
Yeah,
Surely not enough people to form a guild.
right,
But anyway,
right.
so you guys, you go on to win more than you lose in Kunark, but there is one significant hiccup, right? You remember a good old Fippy detective?
I do remember Fippy Detective. Um, I sure do. I forgot about that. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to talk about that?
I want to hear from your side.
Okay. From my side, and this is what I remember, and this is just as these memories are coming back to me. Um, Somebody started making posts on the Fippy forums, which I guess we should talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was the Fippy forums were some forums that an anonymous person had created for the server. I think without any expectations of what Fippy Darkpaw the server would become. Um, and I was a moderator on those forums. I don't remember exactly how that came to be. Um, this has been a long time ago, and I think it eventually became public information anyway. But that family guild that I was a member of first, I don't remember the name of the guild. I'm sure if I could look in old logs and stuff. But the guild leader's name was Mikhail, if I'm pronouncing that right, and he was actually the creator of the Fippy forums. That was not known. I didn't even know that. Um, but there weren't a lot of moderators on there. But I was publicly known. And anyway, one day, somebody under the name uh, uh, Fippy Detective, or I think that was it, right?
Yep, Fippy Detective. It's
Fippy Detective.
still on YouTube.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Starts sharing information, and really what they're doing is I don't remember what zones it was, maybe multiple zones. But when people would be warping in the game, they'd always warp to particular points in these zones, and so they just set up shop and started recording, just screen recording people warping into these locations, and it looked like man, sometimes it looked like Grand Central with these people coming and going so quickly.
Yeah.
um, and a lot of people got caught pretty red-handed using MQ, including a lot of TL folks, TL leadership.
Now,
Um,
I don't think it was ever publicly released who Fippy Detective was, but every guild was doing this. However, one guild never showed up in any of the Fippy Detective videos.
yeah, that's not suspicious.
Right. So it was being done in Fronavi, I think, because every time you remember that people would use like a thing called Piggy Zone. You just type like /zone and then a zone name, and it'll take your character there. But it zones you to the sucker point in every single zone
Right.
along the way.
Yeah.
So he set up in Fronavi
Hmm.
whenever Veneral Satyr was in window,
Hmm.
and everyone would come rolling through. And
Yeah.
then he starts posting all the videos. Basically, everyone in TL leadership
Yeah.
was smiling right at the camera.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And uh, for me, again, I wasn't using MQ, and I was pretty naive about some of the stuff that it could do. Um, so I was pretty disappointed in some of that. It was tough because when the competition was using those tools, and I know how this sounds, but when the competition is using those tools, um, it's hard not to also be using them, even
Yep.
if I wasn't using them myself. Um, but I did care about the integrity of the server. Um, I enjoyed being a moderator on the Fippy forums and getting to, I don't know, kind of work across the aisle sometimes, if that's the right terminology there. Um, and I did have a lot of sympathy towards these other guilds that did want to raid. That got me in some hot water sometimes with the rest of TL leadership. But I I would have liked it. Um, Maybe if more would have come out of the Fippy detective stuff. But I didn't mind it from an accountability perspective. Of course, everybody who was using it, like nobody should have been selectively not sharing about their own guild using it. But
Citizen.
yeah, but I think I think it was appropriate to do.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Jane. So you were an officer, right? Every
Yeah.
guild that I've ever been in, we have an officer chat, and pretty much
Hmm.
officer chat is like no holds barred, right?
Right, right.
So are you suggesting right now that like in your officer chat you didn't know that the rest of TL leadership except you and to be clear to everyone, Jane never appears in the Fippy Detective videos. But are you suggesting that all the other officers were cheating except for you and no one ever talked to you about it or offered it to you or just mentioned it in your presence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I won't say that it was never mentioned because I do remember like Fartaunt and a couple things coming up every now and then. Um, but I think I must have. The only thing I can guess is that I had a reputation for not being okay with using those kinds of tools. Um, now that isn't to say that I didn't have to be in in certain ways complicit with it because I was aware that it was being used. Um, but nobody did offer it to me. Nobody said, "Hey, if you're going to be an officer in this guild, we need to set you up with MQ so that you can, run things effectively or know what's going on with map stuff or be able to warp around to get somewhere quickly." Um, and I think part of the reason for that, I don't know. Some of this is very speculative for me, and I don't know what I don't know what Zain was doing. I don't know if Zain ever used MQ. He was gone too quickly for me to have made some of those guesses.
I
But
mean,
I
do you
know
really have
that
to use it for the 1 week you play, right?
right. I know that Zain, um, in what was posted in the TL private forums, what he said was that he was very adamant about no MQ usage in the guild. Um, he made me an officer, and then yeah, he disappeared like a week later. So if he was using it, I don't know that. Um, but publicly he was very against it, and I kind of took that to heart, I think, and nobody ever gave me a hard time about it.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective there.
Yeah, and that is true, and I could name some of the guys that I know were using it and everything. I mean, most people were, but a lot of people weren't. I genuinely believe that.
I mean,
Um,
some people are just too dumb to use it. Some people want to use it. Like I've had people come up to me and they're like, "Hey, Zaid, I'm not really computer savvy. I don't know how this works, but could you hook me up with some macro quests?" And I'm like, "Hey, dude, you're asking the wrong guy. Like I don't fuck with it." But
right,
there's a lot of people who want it and just lack whatever kind of technical skill is required for getting it.
right, and I don't know how much detail is appropriate to go into that
Well,
kind
the
of stuff.
podcast is called DramaQuest.
Yeah, that's true. And today I know that even if you're on a live server, I mean, at least my understanding, if you're using MQ and streaming that or whatever, you're almost definitely going to get canned by Daybreak. It's not approved software, even when they have given some implied approval, and there's been some stuff with that. And I play on Rizlona, so if you ever want to do a Rizlona chat, there's a whole thing with that too. But I had dabbled with MQ years and years prior, like around 2004, very early on, where if you wanted it, you had to compile it yourself, and it was a huge ordeal, and it was, I mean, there was a huge barrier of entry. And now anybody can Google that stuff and learn all about it, but you can just pay your monthly subscription and not have to worry about all that, which I think was true during those formative Fippity years as well. But honestly, I was so out of the loop with that, I didn't know that. And I was just skeptical that that many people were really compiling MQ for themselves or going through the hassle of compiling it to share with other people.
I think it
Um,
just grew constantly because it was unchecked. GMs really didn't care. Like you had to
no,
catch someone in video. Like even if you caught someone on video doing something really egregious, chances are they weren't going to get suspended.
no, unless they were accidentally typing in MQ commands into say, uh, it seemed really tough to get caught for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Nowadays, at least twice a year, I think they do like an annual wave where you're going to get hit if you're using active hacks like warping and
Right.
shit. But I think a lot
hmm
of people still cheat.
I think a lot of people do, and my take on that, just my own. This is my own personal take. On live servers, instance content, I don't really care what people are doing. Um, but I personally would have preferred in that open world competitive environment. I would have rather there be no MQ at all, and it just be the skill and strategy and execution of the players at the keyboard. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we didn't get that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it's human nature. You see it at the highest and lowest levels of competitive play in everything, right? Like
hmm
EverQuest arguably is the lowest level of competitive
Right.
interaction in the
Yeah.
world, right? But you see it at the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
You see it for Hollywood things with like guys doing steroids to be jacked just so they
hmm
can look the way they need to look. If
Yeah.
people will cheat, like, people will just cheat. They'll cheat if you can get away with cheating. They'll do it. Whatever it takes to win, people will do whatever it takes, and the people who will do anything usually are the people who come out on top.
It's one of the reasons that I have zero interest in a PvP TLP server. Although the inner EQ child within me loves the idea. I started out on Rallosec, and when Solenzek launched, I hopped to that server, and I really enjoyed the PvP journey. Um, but I wouldn't touch a PvP TLP server with a 100-foot pole because I know everybody's just going to be running around with MQ, and I'm not. That's not the PvP I'd be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely be like the hacker server of the
Yep.
Millennium, but I think I'd still play there just because it's probably a once in a lifetime experience to do a TLP PvP.
That's true. And it could be a lot of fun. And I'm not saying that I don't want them to ever release something like that. Um, I just, I think after what I went through at on Fippy, I would be, I just be, I don't know. I don't think that I would want to do the hacker PvP thing, and it would
Ain't your
just feel
memory
like,
of what like the good old PvP days were?
yeah, I would just, I don't want people warping to me in a zone and killing me and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what really would happen, but
That's what would yeah, that is exactly
that
what
is
would
what would
happen.
really happen, right?
Yes, you'd be in West Corona, and 3 Shadow Knights would appear on top of you and harm
Yeah,
touch you.
yeah, exactly.
Um, but anyway, let's talk about Valius. So Kunark,
hmm
boom, you guys crushed it. You win. Valius comes out. I'm interested in whatever you remember.
So for Valios, I remember, I remember our game plan was to get server first Vulak. And unless my memory serves me wrong, we didn't really have too much trouble getting that. We let the other guilds fool around um, with. I don't even know what we didn't fight them for. I just remember that we went straight to TOV and cleared the North Wing and got Vulak, and I don't really remember having too much trouble. And I think that the other guilds we were competing against were happy to get some other server firsts, um, not be challenged by us because we were going to be preoccupied within TOV, and it was I don't remember a lot of drama that opening night. Now maybe you have some notes or details that I'm misremembering, but I remember it being pretty smooth sailing. Now it got crazy after that, but that first night I think everybody kind of got the slice of the pie that they wanted.
The only thing I remember differently was that you guys did go to Kale first. You killed King Tormax and Statue, and then you left Idol up because you thought that Citizen had no chance of killing AOW.
That's probably true.
And I recall it took them all night, but they did kill AOW. But you guys still got your Vulak, and I think you knocked out most of the Sleeper's Tomb mobs. And then it became like, I think we had another situation where no one knew the Vindy respawn timer was so low.
hmm hmm
You remember Poopsock and Vindy for like a week?
Yeah, I do have some memories of that, and I think that I also was surprised at the respawn time.
Oh,
Um,
never mind. I know what it is. It was people. I think the people had figured out the respawn time. People didn't know that Vindy could drop a shard of Hasagra's
right,
talisman.
the ST key.
That wasn't a normal Velius thing. That it had come out later over the years. So you guys
That's right.
were grabbing every
Primary
Vindy
keys.
super aggressively.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I don't remember all of the details about this, although a good buddy of mine, we still keep in touch. He was part of the kind of the Awaken the Sleeper task force, and I know that we were very selective about what class compositions receive those ST keys so that we could get the sleeper awakened as
Right.
quickly as possible and get the Luckland ball rolling.
Yeah. So you guys got in there. You knocked it out. You probably did it with like what 24 people or something like that in that range.
Man, I'm wondering if it was less. Um,
I know for a fact that it wasn't. I don't think it was less than like 22 because 22 and 21 were like the lowest man numbers later on.
yeah. Do you know the name Takizes? I might be
No.
saying it wrong. I always call him Tak. He usually plays a Necro. He's a good buddy of mine. I've known him since Fippy, and um, we still keep up. I talk to him all the time. He was part of that strike force, um, and I thought that was so cool that he was going to get to be one of the few people in EQ history to get to awaken the sleeper. I can put you in touch with him if you ever want to run down at what that was like. It could only be
Yeah.
a 5-minute story. I have no idea,
Yeah.
but he'd probably be
Necros
happy to
are
talk about that.
super powerful
hmm
in Sleeper's Tomb because Ventani is such a pain in the ass to fight. He's got two AEs
hmm
and they're both like, I think they're both like 12 seconds or 15 seconds, so you're dodging all the time. We did a Sleeper's kill with I think 20 characters
hmm
and we had like 0 necromancers in there. And
hmm
we legitimately, well, this was MOTM version, but we
Yeah,
legitimately had a 30-minute Ventani fight as all of our monks were dodging the stupid AEs.
yeah. I remember some of those uh, do you remember when? Did you? I don't remember it. Did you play on Lockjaw?
Yeah, I led the top guild on Lockjaw
Okay,
for a while.
that's what I thought. And on I played on Ragefire and Twisted Legacy, the attempted spiritual successor to Twisted Legion. And so you probably remember when Mitigation of the Mighty was first introduced and
Hmm.
how overtuned it was. Um, and some of those fights were just stupidly long and borderline impossible.
Playing a Sky,
Um,
dude. Remember killing Big B and she was hitting his the for people listening in right here when they first added MOTM to Plane of Sky,
mhm. Which
the
is the
B
fight I was
boss,
thinking of, and we'll talk about that. Yeah.
yeah, boss Zit hit for as much damage as Radlosek the Warlord does in Planes of Power.
Yeah.
15 levels and a tremendous amount of gear, you know what I mean, different. And I think TL and Faceless and Dima were the only three forces to ever kill it in that form, actually, right?
Right, because they retuned it. Um, and during that short window, it was almost impossible to kill. I don't know how y'all did it, and frankly I don't even remember Dima doing it. Although I'm not saying that he didn't, but I know that when we killed it at that highest difficulty level, which I don't think lasted very long, it was
No,
really
it
insane.
was 1 month.
Yeah, but we had Toxin in the guild who always he could field like 30 or 40 mages or something, which was a problem with Mitigation of the Mighty now. But it was just this insane Zerg rush of just getting bodies up there and keeping the fight going. I don't know how long it took us, but we did defeat the encounter, but it was just eh, and it was tough, coming off of that. And then you know Daybreak or Sony, whoever was at the time, kind of fixed the tuning of that stuff. Uh, and then this would have been on Finney for me. But then getting into those zones on Avelios and thinking, did they not retune this? Because these guys have millions of hit points, and
Yeah.
these fights are lasting half an hour while our melees sit there and stick these things for 4 points of damage a swing or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
stupid.
MOTM has ruined Temple of Yushin in particular. But I
Hmm.
don't want to get
Hmm.
too far into
Yeah,
that because
yeah,
like
yeah.
Rage Fire is 2 episodes from now.
Right, 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 right. Sorry, sorry.
No, it's okay. So you guys, you pretty much that's the story of Elias, right? You won. Dima got AOW, Citizen got AOW, you guys got everything else, and pretty much it was just a good racing expansion. But one big notable thing was GM's eventually. Actually, there's a few notable things I forgot.
Hmm.
The duels. Let's talk about the Sazabi duels.
Yes, yes, yes. Um, Man, I don't remember this happening before Valios, although maybe it happened once or twice in a smaller way. I just don't remember it. But this was significant this time because someone recorded it and put it on YouTube. I don't know if the video is still up anymore. I feel like it.
They got taken down because
Yeah, I
of
got.
the songs. You had a
Yeah,
bad
yeah, of
day.
course, of course. Um, but a GM basically was like, "Hey, we're gonna do a trial by combat for this dragon." I don't even remember what dragon it was, or if it was a dragon. Maybe it was
You guys
Tormax.
were
I don't know.
doing trial by combat was for VM and for statue. Those were the two
Okay,
times.
okay. And yeah, so we picked our guy, and Citizen picked their guy, and here they are dueling each other for rights to this raid, and we won, and it was really cool. It's a great memory. It's really cool to watch, and I remember going back and watching the video and thinking, man, what a what fun times those were. But in the moment, it was really stupid. Like, it's just insane that these GMs were showing up and making us do trivia questions or PvP to settle who gets rights to the dragon or whatever.
Yeah.
um it's still a bad taste in my mouth because it just you're appealing to, you think you're making an appeal to a professional uh, authority who's just acting real childlike to settle disputes.
100%. Yeah. So that first duel was
Hmm.
Sazabi, who's considered the best Shadow Knight in the
Yeah.
golden era
Hmm.
of EQ,
Hmm.
versus Lucerin. Or sorry,
Hmm.
not Lucerin. He was named Dark Rend.
Hmm. Darkrend.
Yeah. Nowadays, he plays as Lucerin on Mischief.
Oh, okay. Okay.
He's one of the leaders of a guild called Oathbreakers. So, Oathbreakers out there, here's a good story about one of your officers. Lucerin has to duel Sazabi. He's the unfortunate soul who's got to duel the best Shadow Knight ever. And they start the duel, and apparently Lucerin remembers that, or doesn't remember that he's got MacroQuest on.
Yeah.
Now, a big part of dueling back then is jousting,
Yeah.
and you cannot joust if you have stick turned on
No.
or MQ melee or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Lucerin gets absolutely bodied for like the first 50%. I don't know if it was just not letting him attack or what, but totally messed up. And the legend has it that it was actually Mabu who had to be like, "Hey, Lucerin, you idiot, turn off your hacks so that you can actually fight this guy." But by then it was too late. It was a total blowout.
Hmm.
And then you guys got that statue. Now a week later, the same thing happened. Been TOV for Vayem, and Citizen was like, "We're not going to make that same mistake again." This time they chose a necromancer, Lil Death Tripod.
I remember Lil Death.
Yeah, and a little gnome necromancer. And
Uh-huh.
again, he did okay, but just another blowout. Sasabi's too good. Can't beat that Troll Shadow Knight energy in those eras.
Yeah. I mean, I just, I don't know who you. It does, to me. It doesn't make any sense to pit anything but a Shadow Knight against a Shadow Knight. I don't. I'm trying to think, especially drawn from like my PvP background in those eras, but I just don't think you're going to outmatch the the tool set that SK has in a PvP battle, um, and then to deal with somebody who doesn't even know what they're doing and running around with MQ and um, Necro seems like real tough. That seems like a real stretch to me, but
I mean, if I was in an outdoor zone where I had room to kite, I'd do like a Ranger or Necro versus an SK.
that could work. Hmm.
But in those GM situations, you have a very small space,
Yeah.
and it's like nothing's going to beat the Shadow Knight. So yeah,
Yeah,
they
that's
definitely
just.
blew that.
Mhm.
But I mean, what were they going to do realistically, right? Like melee versus melee is always going to be a loss because there was a tremendous gear differential between the guilds at this point. You know?
There really was, and I think it's easy to forget about that, even if you're playing on TLPs today in those earlier areas, because we all just do our agents of change and get our weekly loot. Um, but TL was easily getting 90% of the raid loot on the server at any given time
Yep.
during those early expansions, and sometimes that was probably a low number. It was probably over 95% sometimes. But
Dima usually managed to just barely kill every raid mob one time during the expansion.
right. But a lot of guilds didn't get to kill everything even once.
Right.
And so the gear that we had, even though we did have a lot of mouths to feed, that gear really had to go around. Um, I think we tended to be pretty well geared, and I'm sure, I don't know how much of a factor that was in it in those duels specifically, but I'm sure it was still a factor.
Yeah. So then shortly after that, the mandatory rotation gets pushed out by head GM Kale Dread. I don't remember the
Hmm.
exact mechanics of how it worked, but I remembered like if you had TOV one week, you had Kale the next week.
Yeah, there was some kind of back and forth like that. I don't remember it exactly either.
Do you
But
remember there's a legendary moment between I think it was actually between you and Dima where the GM's like, okay, you guys are doing this. One guild, whoever like wins is going to get this one. Whoever loses is going to get the other one. He was talking about a full spawn of Temple of Ishan
yeah, yeah,
versus
yeah,
Kale.
yep.
Please tell me this story.
And you still may have more details than I have. But the little bit that I remember was, I think that whatever we were negotiating, I felt like I like clued into, and this may have been that the GM wasn't familiar with the content or something. Um, but he was offering like all of NTOV, um, against something much smaller. Um, and I was kind of like, uh, yeah, well, we went all of NTOV, and somehow, man, I wish that I could remember this better.
You ready
Um,
for me to blow your mind right now?
yeah, yeah, go ahead. All I remember was I was kind of like, I feel like we accepted this deal, and I was like, why why is why would they not want what we just asked for? This seems like so much more in our favor. So yeah, blow my mind and tell me what you've got there.
I have a 20-page, I don't know why I still have this. I have a 20-page chat log between you, Dima, and the GM from
Yeah.
2011.
Okay, okay.
Um, so it was GM Vedden. He
Yeah.
summons you guys both to the Canos Aqueduct system. Hello,
Uh-huh.
you two. Dima says hail. Of course, Dima tries to schmooze this guy immediately.
There was a lot of
He's,
that.
he says, gonna make this spawn dispute really simple. Each of you random 1,000. Highest number gets the zone. Losers Guild leaves the zone for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Magic die is rolled by Jain. Could have been anything. This time it was a 946.
Pretty good roll.
Failure to do so will equal bad things, Vedden says. Dima rolls a die, 498. And then Dima says, this is for Kale Drackle, right? And you said, my guild's in Western Wastes. Vedden says, congrats, Jane. The zone is yours until 5 p.m. tomorrow. Vedden says, Jane, you want Kale, correct? You say, that is not correct.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You're right. You're right. Keep going.
Dima jumps in, we'd like TOV. And Vedna says, so you'd like the Temple of Vishan. And you say, I can create / reports stating as much if Dima has not already created them. Twisted Legion wants Temple of Vishan. Vedna says, I've got my logs. Very well. Tell Twisted Legion they get TOV. Dima gets Kale.
Yeah, I did forget about those details. But I'm sure that we've probably talked about that many times over the years. Um, yeah, I forgot about that, but that's right. And there was always the weird cat and mouse stuff with trying to track down exactly what was going to happen. But I remember sitting there, and I wouldn't necessarily say that like the opportunity fell into my lap, but it was more like, why why is Dima trying to speak for me and what we want? Um, and the way that that worked, I thought, man, hopefully the GM is not going to buy that or go for that. And so, yeah, I do remember wanting to be extremely clear about, and 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 it wasn't like I was just trying to manipulate the GM. I mean, like I said in the chat that you read, like we were in Western Waste, like that's where we were headed. That is what we wanted.
Right.
Um, and sometimes it was real tough to not get manipulated out of what you wanted. But I remember in that moment, I did forget about all that. I'm glad that you had that handy. Um, Thinking, man, surely this GM is not going to let this go. Um, and thankfully that all worked out.
I think there was another time where the GM like made you guys roll for Kale.
Hmm.
It was just for a Kale spawn dispute,
Hmm.
and Dima wins the roll.
Hmm.
Maybe this is just in my imagination, but Dima wins the roll, and the GM goes, "Okay, Citizen gets Kale, TL has to vacate. TL gets TOV since they can't enter Kale for the next
Hmm.
24 hours." And you guys are like, "Well, okay, we'll take
Yeah.
that." And Dima goes off mad. I'm not sure. Maybe that's just me. Like, it's been over what has it been? 13 years now. So,
Yeah.
but
It,
gosh, it
it,
was good.
the thing is that even if some of those details are wrong, that kind of stuff, it was like it happened. I don't want to say so much, but it happened enough times that even with the details wrong, like it's still easy to remember that kind of thing happening. Um, and again, I don't know if that's if you chalk that up to the GMs trying to officiate this stuff, having no idea about the content or the value of it or whatever. Um, but yeah, stuff where you'd be like, "Oh, you won that zone," and then you could almost like I want to be careful about um thinking along the terms of like manipulating the deal or whatever. And I mean, you just read those chat logs, not trying to manipulate anything with there, but just be real specific about what's going on. But it almost felt like you could say something like, "Oh, they won that zone, um, so they get that zone for the next 24 hours," and the GM be like, "Yeah," and you'd be like, "So they need to stay in that zone for those 24 hours. It's theirs. Like they shouldn't be doing stuff other places, right?" And
Right.
sometimes the GM would just be like, "Yeah, that sounds good." And you're like, "Okay, cool. So we get the rest of the server while you're stuck in that zone for 24 hours." And it's just real goofy. Just real goofy.
Yeah, it was you never knew what was going to happen, really.
No, no, it's just such a lottery with so much of that stuff.
Okay, so with all that, then they go to the mandatory rotations that you have to
Mhm.
deal with, and that was
Mhm.
driven, I think, by some stuff on on Vulak that I'll talk about next week.
Sure.
But you guys had to deal with pseudo mandatory rotations, I
Mhm.
think, throughout the rest of Velius, but not in Luckland. Is that correct?
No, I don't remember that in Luckland. Um, and I think that there was even an attempt at some mandatory rotations in Kunark too, but I think it just never really. I think the GMs just never really got around to enforcing it. Um, but usually, and I'll speak broadly here, and tell me if you want to get more detailed with Valios specifically. But typically, the way that these rotations worked, I didn't raid back in the day before progression servers, but I understand that a lot of those original servers, they would do rotations on the in-game content, and I didn't raid during those years, so I don't know what that was like, but I got the impression that kind of whatever the next time the dragon spawned, you basically had like 24 hours to go kill it. And the guilds would. Like they would know when it was going to spawn and they would kill it, and then the rotation would move on. Um, but with our bat phone system and the highly competitive nature of the server and everything, even the rotations that we would come up with, um, it sounds like they were designed in a way that other people couldn't participate in them or compete with them. And that's not untrue, but they were designed uh, where they were designed at the level that we were trying to compete at. And so we would say, like, when the dragon spawns, you need to kill it within an hour or it goes FFA. Or, you if the dragon spawned during this window of time, then you need to kill it or it would rotate to the next guild. And I wouldn't say that we like wrote that stuff with the intention that people would miss those windows or not be able to kill something in a certain amount of time. Um, but it is kind of the way that it happened, and it was a little bit tough because let's say that we even gave someone 3 hours to kill a dragon. Um, and then this other guild, and we're not talking about like Citizen or Armageddon. We're talking about like the B or C tier guilds that were asking to be part of the rotation. Um, and they would say, "Yeah, but what if that dragon spawns at 3 a.m.?" And we'd be like, "Well, you have to kill it at 3 a.m. because we're willing to kill it at 3 a.m."
Right.
And then but they weren't just like looking down the barrel of the gun at us. They had all these other guilds that were also interested in competing for these dragons. And so these guys, even if they didn't necessarily want to get up at 3 a.m. to kill a dragon either, they were kind of like, "Yeah, but if you dawdle around and leave that dragon up for 8 hours or 12 hours until you can get the force to kill it, man, that pushes our dragon back even farther.
Right.
And
Slower for everybody, less loot for the whole server.
right. And mathematically, like, that is true. It's not an invalid argument. Um, right or wrong, I don't know about the morals of it necessarily, but the math isn't wrong. And so there was a real, like, put up or shut up type mentality there. And a lot of those lesser guilds that, they just wanted to raid on Thursday nights and that was it. If their dragon spawned on Monday, man, they were just fucked. They weren't, they didn't even have a chance. But you had 7 other guilds ahead of them that were happy to kill that dragon on Monday. So that's just kind of where the cookie crumbled.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it still meant a lot more people had access to content. It just wasn't the casual dream people hoped it might be.
No. Mm-mm.
Now that lasts through Velius. We get into Luckland.
Mm-hmm.
What goes on in Luckland?
So, Luckland, of course, you have all the keying issues that you have with some of these other expansions, people fighting over the key camps and stuff like that. Um, but what I specifically remember with Luckland is all the drama over the killing the Emperor. Um, and it's not a fight that I've done in a couple years, so I'm probably going to misremember some of this. But what I specifically remember was basically a DPS race on the Emperor, and you've got those mobs that you've got to keep the mobs that you got
Yep.
to keep mezzed, and and Thraka just running around and breaking all the citizens' mezzes over and over and over again, and that kind of comes back to well, the game lets us do it, so if you don't want us to do
Right.
it, fix your game.
Yep.
And I guess that they are kind of trying to fix the game with this first to engage stuff on this new server. I haven't really kept up too much with that. Um, but, we took advantage of so much of that and really made those fights messy and interesting and I guess memorable.
Now, do you remember? So, two things I want to actually touch on. First is
Mm-hmm.
like Emp Straw had a really brutal window. His window is
Mm-hmm.
like 36 hours long.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so those socks were terrible. By
They
then,
were.
people had retired from like, we're going to sock 3 days straight. But then you get 36 hours for Emp anyway. So you're just like, fuck. The other thing was, do you remember Citizen claiming they were the server first top guild because they got the server first Kadi Shah, and that was actually the hardest raid mob in the expansion?
I don't know if I remember them making that claim. That sounds like the kind of claim that they would have made, and I don't really know um, why you would make that kind of claim when clearly Aten Hara is the end, the final boss of the expansion, and I guess I can sort of see the argument about Kadisha being a more challenging fight. Um, I think it was still pretty bugged back then. I don't remember
It's
specifically.
still pretty bugged right now.
Yeah, that's fair. Um,
I mean, Kadishah's hard. It's maybe harder than Emp, definitely harder than Anha Ra, but I mean, the boss is the boss, right? And that's kind of what people shoot for. But I can understand where they're coming from because, when you're the guild leader of the number 2 guild, you have to, like, propaganda is your tool, right? You have to keep people motivated. But it was always just so funny to see very public push, like, oh, we're the top guild because we killed Kadi Shah first.
yeah, I mean, it feels like such a propaganda thing. Um,
Other
uh,
people are like, who? What is Kadi Shah?
right, right. But even if you do know, I mean, to me that would be like saying, yeah, we're the top Kunark guild because we killed Gornair first.
Right.
I
Yes,
mean,
is exactly the same principle.
yeah, like, but everybody knows that's just Vox wandering around in the desert and snow mountains. Like, it's not, nobody cares about that compared to Trachanon or Foradar. Like, yeah, it's an important dragon to kill, but nobody's going to think, oh, you're the champions of Kunark because you got server first Gornair. Nobody would ever think that.
Right. Yep. So I think you guys pretty well locked them out of Vexthal. and it was only you guys in Vexthal until like 2 weeks before pop, right?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Again, no instances, no agents of change, anything like that. Um, so keeping Emperor primarily locked down, or at least locked down enough that Citizen, let alone anybody else, could get enough keys to field any kind of force in Vexthal, and then it not being instanced. We had Koth boxes, mages camped at various points so we could skip ahead for the trash. And if your guild didn't have that, you were still trying to clear through that trash, just wasted so much of your time. Um, we really were able to slow down the rest of the server there, just by denying those keys.
Yeah. But then in pop, it becomes a totally different race now, right? Because there's multiple targets and multiple progression paths that are not
Hmm.
instanced. So I think in pop launch, you guys rushed Grummus, right?
Yeah, I do remember that. I do remember rushing Grummus. Um, trying to think what else I might remember from. Mostly, I think I just remember camping Plane of Storms, trying to get those damn
Oh yeah.
medallions or whatever.
Yes.
That's what I remember from Pop.
I think didn't Citizen get suspended? The whole raid, their whole pop launch raid got suspended, I think, because
Yes,
when
because they were exploiting something with that door in Plane of Innovation,
yes. So
and they
like
got caught red-handed. Yep.
after they lost Grummus, they ran to Innovation and Darkblood of Solusek Ro, which is the other guild that we were forgetting to mention here.
Yep. Dark Blood, and I
They were
remember
they
them
were
as
a
being
good
pretty good
guild.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. So Darkblood had done the dragon.
Yeah. The Junk
Is it
Dragon, whatever.
Xanamek?
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know. Yeah, so yeah, it was Xanamek. So they had done Xanamek. They were getting the key and they were going over to do Magnetic Behemoth. And
Hmm.
Dima just had everyone die at the door and get corpse summoned, get dragged through the door
Yeah.
and rest on the other side. And then they went for Magnetic Behemoth. And I think they got suspended for that, but it took a little time because didn't they also get the server first Ralosek in Planet Tactics?
Man, they probably did, but
I recall they got that Magnetic Behemoth, then they went directly to Tactics, killed Ralosek. It was a huge post on their website, and it was the fastest he had ever been killed. So it was cool. I think it
right.
was the first time he had ever been killed day one of pop at that point. And then like the next day they're all suspended for the innovation door skip.
Yeah, and that's what was so crazy, because up until that point, um, Sony had the GMs had suspended guild leaders periodically. Um, uh, Officers had been suspended. Sometimes it was a whole officer team. Um, and in fact, at some point, I think that we just found a level one mule and made that guy the guild leader, because nobody wanted to wear the TL leader tag. That's how
Right.
that's how problematic these suspensions were becoming. Um, but that was the first time, at least on Fippy, I don't know what's going on other servers, that basically an entire guild got suspended for a week, and that was that really was such a setback for them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really difficult to exaggerate what a setback it was to just not play pop for a whole week while the rest of the server is getting flagged.
Right. Like half your people aren't even going to be 65 when you get back. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Hmm.
So, but this really starts the end of TL though.
Yeah, it does. I don't know if it's because of my time with TL, or probably just playing on multiple progression servers, but I know for a lot of people, like, Planes of Power is just the height of EQ for them, and that's not the case for me. I do enjoy it. I think the lore is really cool. I love how much love I think was put into that expansion. Um, but once you get to Plane of Time and you're just farming that over and over and over for weeks and weeks and weeks, um, for me, a lot gets lost there. And I think that was just kind of true for um, TL as a whole. And I'll go into that a little bit more. But I remember, I think, I think we were like triple splitting time by the end of the expansion. I know we were double splitting it. I think we were triple splitting it. We just had so many people who were playing, and of course, the zone is such a loot pinata. You just go get loot. Um, and but the competition wasn't there anymore. There was really nobody to beat or to race. We weren't DPS racing anything. Um, and I don't want to skip too far ahead, but once you get to Gates of Discord and Omens of War, um, the number of open world targets that you need to fight over just drops so drastically that whatever that thing was that was the lifeblood of TL just didn't just dropped off so sharply. It was really tough for the guild.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted to fight people.
Right. We wanted
Yeah.
we wanted to have somebody to beat. We wanted to have somebody to compete with. And even though a lot of the stuff was citizen and to some extent the other guilds was really annoying, frustrating, stressful, it was also what we were playing for. And when we couldn't have that anymore, it was just like the spirit of the guild was just diminished very quickly.
Yeah. Now, I personally, I think that racing expansion launches in the instanced eras is just as good, maybe even a little bit better
Hmm.
than those early eras because
Hmm.
it's still a race,
Hmm.
but the amount you could do to impact one another, the other guilds is a lot reduced. So you just really get to see who's better, who is just
Right.
better at the content. Um, but TL always struck me as that guild that like they wanted to fight and they wanted to look the other guild in the eyes. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? They didn't want to have it be behind those instanced closed doors. Now, the other thing though was that Dima coordinated a vote because remember these servers, yeah, once you cleared all the content, there was still a vote on when the new expansion would
Hmm.
unlock.
Hmm.
He coordinated the vote, the first and I think the only time ever that the expansion voted no for opening.
Hmm.
He coordinated a vote, and people kept voting no. And it was a couple of months of extra time that you guys had to spend in pop on top of it already being a long expansion with Eldon and shit tacked in there.
Yeah, that
And
that
I
that's
think that just
that's
crippled the
true.
guild.
I think that it did. Well, I'll say this. I think that it crippled the guild. We were so sick of Planes of Power and couldn't get into Gates of Discord. Um, but of course, we eventually the vote did pass. We did get into Gates of Discord, and TL did just fine in Gates, and then Omens of War. And it was during before we had beaten Omens of War is when I took a break. Like I'd mentioned, I had moved to the Pacific Coast, so I was on PST time. I had gotten a full time job, and TL was trying to figure out like more of a scheduled rating approach. Still competing for open world targets, but the instant stuff. When are we going to do it? And it didn't. It just TL was, even though we rated 24/7, the majority of the guild was an East Coast guild, and so what they settled on for the times didn't really work for me, and that was
Yeah.
that was kind of the beginning of the end for Jain Farstrider, um, the shaman that I was playing. But that increased time in Planes of Power, and man, anybody listening to this who has done more than one TLP through Planes of Power, when you're trying to find something else interesting to do, so you're also doing those god awful Eldon raids. I mean, I think that the raids, the concept of them are interesting, but they also get. It's very difficult to compare like the rewards from the Eldon raids to the loot pinatas that time is, so it feels really weird. It's just a real spirit crusher, I think. Um, but I don't think that just was like the beginning of the end for TL necessarily, but I think that coordinated vote to kind of hold the server hostage in Planes of Power. I think it really hurt the server in the long run too. I don't think that just hurt TL as a guild.
Yeah, I mean, it hurt this whole server for sure. People just get
Mm-hmm.
bored. People quit.
Mm-hmm.
Comp's already a tough time.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's see. Um, I think Citizen they either won the race for GOD or Omens. I want to say they won Omens.
That might be true. Um, and I may not have even been playing to know. Uh, I
Now the
I remember like the early what's the thing where you're collecting all the skins or whatever. Like I remember us all running around. I remember trying to get flagged for stuff, but I don't actually remember um like I don't remember ever going into Anguish on Fippy. I don't think I was playing by the time we got to Anguish.
okay. Well, I think one of the big dynamics there was until Planes of Power, honestly, until the end of Planes of Power, there had always been a
Mhm.
huge gear gap between TL and everyone else because of
Mhm.
content control.
Mhm.
But when Dima was able to get into Plane of Time
Yes.
and then delay that vote, he was able to 100% close a year-long gear gap.
That's true. Finally get his guild outfitted properly.
Right. And then like suddenly you have to compete with a guild that's fucking hungry because second place,
Mhm.
no one is hungrier than the second place guild.
Correct.
And yeah, and you guys were, a little bit past your prime at that point. I think you guys won God, but it was close. And people were kind of like, oh shit. Then he won Omens, Citizen won, and DON they won. POR was when TL officially broke up, right?
So this is what I remember, and this is kind of the last of my Fippy memories. Um, but I think that maybe they had walked back the raid times a little bit, or something like that, or maybe it was something had changed a bit with my work schedule, or like I was willing to show up to raids 30 minutes late or something. I don't remember, but I remember saying, "Hey, I think I'm gonna try to come back." And I remember doing some DON raids and getting some loot from those. But I remember specifically um, uh, DODH um, logging in, and I don't remember where we were at. Like, like I don't think we had completed it, but I honestly don't know because I had literally just like logged in um, that week. All this happened within a week's time.
Mm.
Um, but I remember logging in, and when we should have been buffing up for the raid and everything, uh, I think Drillison was leading the guild at the time, and he got on with the guild in voice chat and said, "Hey, all the officers have talked about this, and we're shutting the guild down." And it wasn't like, "Hey, if anybody wants to take the reins, you can keep going." Um, that was the end, and I can still log into Jain. Well, I guess Fippy got merged, right? Recently, I don't think the server exists anymore.
Some
Yeah.
random server now.
Right. So I have no idea what's going on there. I'm sure Jane X lives on a server, but um, up until before that, 2 or 3 years ago, I could log into that character, and the guild roster was just, I mean, it had been frozen in time for 10 years. That literally was just the end of the guild.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember there being a moment where like Drill logged on and led a raid and they wiped, I think it was to Mad Marianne on that bridge in POR right before
Hmm.
Death Knell. And I think that was like the last big thing I saw. And then another guild kind of formed out of the people who wanted to stick around from TL and some
Hmm.
others. I think it was like what was left of Darkblood and TL
Hmm.
formed Aim to Misbehave, which I think Yace was a officer, and I don't remember who the leader was. Might have been Bomumgar.
I remember those names. I remember Yace more. Um, I thought Bomumgar was a Rosengard guy.
Bomumgar led another guild. He might have been in Rosengard too.
Yeah, probably getting some wires crossed though. That's
Yeah, I mean
that's
me
fine.
too. But anyway, they formed, and they did a lot on the forums. I don't think they ever amounted to much in game, and they died after a couple months.
Man, we could probably just sit here and talk for an hour about just the forum side of all this,
Oh yeah.
which we won't. But
Um, so that happened, and then I mean, I hate
Hmm.
to do this, but really, the rest of the server was kind of like a new expansion came out and Citizen cleared it, and that was it. Eventually, Vulak had EOE, the top guild from Vulak, merged over into Fippy and fought Citizen. And you basically have a guild that had never lost before. They go up against Citizen, who had lost many times and still stuck
Yeah.
around. EOE loses and promptly like doesn't know how to handle that and falls apart, right?
Right.
And then
Is that
Citizen continues its
Hampshire's
path.
guild?
It is Hampshire's guild. I think it was Damdor at the time still.
Okay.
Might have been Hampshire by then already.
Yeah, I just know the names. I don't have a lot of firsthand experience in interacting with either of them. But yeah, I do remember Damdor being mentioned too.
Yeah. And for people who are listening, this is not the what we would call quote the real Damdor, which was a prominent player on Fennon. This is a guy who took Damdor's name and has probably now become, I think, maybe more well known as Damdor than the original. But
That's interesting. I didn't know
yeah,
that.
it's funny how it happened. But yeah, so that's I think in a nutshell, that's pretty much Fippy. Have we missed anything?
Man, we've probably mentioned a million things, and I've still got a Google Docs folder with old notes and rotation agreements and all kinds of stuff. Um, I have a lot of log files from back then too. I'm sure I could go through and come up with all kinds of other stories, but we've also been talking for a pretty long time, and um, you probably don't want me to go on for another 2 hours, although I probably
Right,
could. A lot of those guys I'm still friends with today. Um, not a ton of them. A lot of that inner TL core has continued. Like I said, we kind of reemerged on Ragefire as a bit more cohesive than. Well, I don't know. That was kind of my last time. After that, with Finney, I was more committed to. I was farther along in life and had more stable schedule. I can't be doing bat phone stuff. I'm working 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, whatever. So my lifestyle didn't really work with that. But um, so I don't know what it's been like in kind of those reemergences of those core people through the TLP servers, but they do, like I see these names pop up, and some of those guys I do still keep up with, and we still, shoot the shit about the good old days on Fippy sometimes. I mean, we did have a ton of fun. It's just a couple of years there of, I think, really unique EQ history, which I don't think could have existed before that server. I know there was Combine and Sleeper, and what they had was unique in a different way. Um, but I think with like the pick zones and agents of change and stuff that's come out since, which I think are all good things, and I like them, except for mitigation of the mighty. I don't like that. But the rest of these improvements, I think, are good quality of life improvements that these servers did need to retain players. Um, but it also meant that what we had on that server for those 2 or 3 years, it can't happen anymore again. I don't
right,
think.
yeah. It's true. Yeah, it was a good time. It was a special time. Guilds
Hmm.
don't have to be as social anymore. You know what I mean? A lot of guilds are like their own
Mm-mm.
little bubbles these days.
Yeah, I have no idea who plays EQ outside of my guild on Rizlona.
Yeah,
I don't even know.
I mean Rizlona especially is probably worse
Yeah,
than
especially
others, but
Rizlona.
like I mean the reality is like back then you knew everybody on your server who was at max level.
Hmm.
As hard as it might be to believe, you knew all of them. You knew who was an idiot and you knew who wasn't.
You really did. And that was both in game and out of game, because like everybody was active on the forums, both the Fippy forums and the official forums. Everybody ran their mouth everywhere they could. It was pretty it's pretty fun, but in some ways it was also probably pretty sad.
Yeah. Now, I do want to note that even after all that and everything that happened, Citizen had a huge run where they were the top dogs.
Hmm.
I want to say that Citizen, uh, well, I know for a fact they did not make it to live on Fippy. No guild on Fippy or Vulak made it. No one went the distance. Both of the servers in that regard were a failure. They both didn't make it. Um, I want to think. I think Citizen made it to the Darkened Sea. Couldn't beat the Darkened Sea, so they were deep in the lineup. but they just couldn't get it all the way. Now they would go on to do great things later, as Original Gangster Club, maybe
Yep.
the worst guild name in history, but they did go the distance, something that almost no other guild has ever done. So hats off to them. Just wasn't on Fippy. Jane, do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Man, no, probably not. I think we've said all the good stuff. I could reminisce for far longer, I'm sure, but I think that we've hit all the top points of the server and kind of walked through at least the TL chapters, and I do commend Citizen for as far as they got on it, um, but it was
Listen, it is very demoralizing to lose an EverQuest when there's no other way to feed your guild, because like you either get the mob or you don't. And Citizen was able to do it basically for years
mhm.
and not give up. And it is really a testament to the strength of that guild and the willpower, and
I,
especially Dima for pulling that off and sticking with it.
I agree, and for you and anybody else who knew me or any of the TL leadership, I mean, this is what I can end on. Hats off to Dima for what he did do on that server, because man, we had to work hard, strategize, and a lot of times scheme and do all this stuff across what I felt like was a fairly sizable pool of very exceptional players to accomplish what we did. Man, a lot of times Dima being my slash our arch nemesis, man, it was like he led that guild and accomplished what he did basically just by sheer force of will. I mean, I know
Yeah.
that he had an officer team too, but th- I don't know how he ruled that guild with his iron fist or whatever, but they didn't have all the leadership changes that we had. And I was never in that guild. I don't know what it was like. I know that some people went over there and joined them when TL did fold. I did not. Um, but that is impressive what he was able to do with that guild, even though we did kind of have our boot on his neck. Through the uninstanced content. Um, he hung in there the whole time, and then once the instant stuff kind of killed the competition for TL and TL bowed out, he did do a great job keeping really the server going.
Yeah. And you know what?
I absolutely concede that.
He did all that too while pretty much being harassed. You know what I mean? And he was harassed a lot on Lockjaw too when he competed
Hmm.
on Lockjaw. So I remember there was a famous, not famous, but there was a well-known picture of Dima that someone in TL had gotten a hold of and passed around, and they photoshopped it so it looked like he was wearing makeup or like he had cum on his face. You know what I mean? That sort of
Yeah,
thing. He had to deal with that, and then like the guild leadership channel on Fippy was literally called Dima Sucks.
yeah. Well, we were very mature on that server. We
Right.
were.
Yeah. So he gotta give your hats off to him for that. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up the Fippy timeline. I don't think I have anything else to say on it, Jane. I think having you on has been really awesome. Super happy to have you. Maybe we'll talk again for the Rizlona episode.
Sure, yeah. I was glad to hear from you, and it's always fun to catch up. And doing it in an official type way like this, I think, is probably good too. I'm sure that a lot of people will listen to this and have a lot of good memories, maybe some bad memories too.
Yeah. All right, folks. If you stuck it out all the way to the end here, thanks again. Please feel free to share the podcast with your friends if you like it. You can reach out to me on Discord. I am Zaide. Now the Discord has changed its names. I am literally just Zaide, Zaide. Hit me up, DM me in the description for this podcast. You'll have all of our links and everything. You can join the Discord for this podcast, and come and ask questions and talk about things that you want us to cover. But anyway, that's the episode. Zaide out. Thanks.